What are the top 5 sins that lead to demonic obsession or demonic possession? Today, I'm joined with an expert who's written books on this and has worked with some of the top exorcists in the world on demonic possession. We're going to talk about those top 5 sins and a bunch of other fascinating topics as it pertains to the demonic and God's power over expelling the demonic. Dr. Dan Schneider.
Marshall, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. What are the top 5 sins leading to possession?
Okay, so let me clarify.
Yep.
And let us distinguish, as the beloved Thomas would say. So in the introduction to the book, Father Ripperger gives some statistics, so it's not a spoiler alert, but the year that he tracks statistics, the last year he tracked statistically those who came to the church for help, it was less than 0.1% were actual possession. So
these are people coming saying, I have a demon, I'm possessed. When you actually get in and do diagnostics and talk to them,
right,
0.1%?
0.5%.
0.5%.
Yeah,
okay.
3 out of 600 were actual possession. So it's very rare, but the devil wants to give you, he wants to take charge and credit for everything. And so most people can self-deliver through just the good, clean living of their faith. But there are certain patterns. The demon is probably the most predictable creature in the cosmos in terms of how he patterns. And there's certain things that he looks for. And so whether they're holding points, entry points, or blockages to grace, and what we mean by blockages, we call obex or obecy, multiple obexes. These are occlusions that block grace from flowing into the soul. We as Catholics believe that the normal avenue of grace flows into the world in the ordinary way through 7 principal means, and those are the 7 sacraments of the Catholic Church. So reorienting the soul, right? We have to begin with the definition of liberation. Liberation is reconciliation with God the Father through Jesus Christ in and through the sacraments. And so that's our focus, returning. Otherwise, we can fall into white magic, Father Amorth says. If we look for quick ways, shortcuts, workarounds, we have to look to get grace open to the soul. And so we have to identify those areas where either the enemy has entered, he's holding, right, or we're allowing him there. So back to your original question, because you and I have PhDs, and if you know the book that says if you give a mouse a cookie, then you got to give them milk, and you give them.
Yeah.
So anyway, you ask a question of you,
right.
Then we go into multiple directions. Right. So going back to your 5.
We start with number 1?
Number 1, the biggest one.
Not in order of precedence here.
Not in order of precedence, but this is the most common.
Okay.
I'll give you the most common.
All right.
Number 1 is occult practices, dabbling in the occult, right? So occult means hidden. And so we have when you participate in occult activity, you create an open door to the diabolic.
Right.
And so part of discernment, if you give it a working definition of Catholic discernment, is knowing clean from unclean. You know, this is something that I've learned studying with Father Ripperger and his longtime assistant, Mr. Kyle Clement. Discerning clean from unclean sexual practices, clean from unclean speech, clean from unclean thinking, clean from unclean habits, clean from unclean liturgy, if you will, clean from unclean prayer. And so occult practices are very unclean practices. It goes all the way back to the giving of the Decalogue. When God gave the 10 Commandments, he says, to those who hate me, I will curse to the 3rd and 4th and the 5th generation. And so then he tells you what to hate God means. And he lists off the abominable practices of false worship, of worshiping false deities. And in Psalm 96:5, the gods of the Gentiles are demons. And so occult activity is any activity we do that gives false worship or honor to other than the true, living, and only God.
Yeah. So we're talking about, Ouija boards, yes, but also drawing a pentagram on the ground and soaking yourself in pig's blood and jumping into it.
We've seen everything in between.
Yeah. So what are some of the occult practices? Because I think a lot of people will think, oh, that's harmless. It's no big deal. It's kind of fun or whatever. But when you say occult practices, can you give us a few examples?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the demon only works in the objective, although he drives us into the subjective. He's only in the objective, meaning the working definition of the demon, according to Father Ripperger, is a lawyer from hell. So he knows the rules, and he wants to drive us to not know the rules. That's why it's important to know the rules of engagement. In the manual, I use Rogers Rules for Rangers. I found my old Army Ranger handbook when I was trying to write this book, and I thought, this is perfect. Their very first rule, every range of Rogers Rules for Rangers, every ranger is and Rangers still use this today, every ranger is bound by the rules and articles of war. And so the demon knows the rules of engagement, and we don't know them very well. In Revelation 12, for example, the devil sits before the throne of God day and night accusing the brethren. And what's he accusing us of? All those violations, objective violations. So he's going to drive us to the subjective. Well, I didn't know. I didn't realize that this was bad. Or I didn't really mean it. What if the priest says mass and he gets the giggles, right? And subjectively, he's distracted or doesn't even believe. Objectively, it still takes place, right? So the objectivity.
Right. So someone could say, well, I did this satanic ritual because it was like I was with my friends and I thought it'd be fun. But objectively, Satan looks at that and he's like, you opened the portal, we're coming in. Whether, no matter what you were thinking about it, right. Objectively, you created a portal.
By right, a baptized soul belongs to God. Mm-hmm. The baptized soul belongs to Jesus Christ by right, but we can give permissions. And so there's a whole host of ways. And we're living in a remember President Obama said that we are no longer Christian, we're a post-Christian nation. To be post-Christian, by definition, is to be neo-pagan.
Yeah.
We're becoming neo-pagan again. And so this is a list. So you mentioned Ouija board, tarot cards. We see these often. Father Bamonte was the former president of the International Association of Exorcists. He says that extraordinary diabolic activity, we got to be clear, because ordinary diabolic activity is temptation. It's like when I was in the Army, I was going through the chow line, being a good Yankee from Ohio, going through the chow line. Whenever I got to that white, disgusting looking substance, I would say, I don't want any cream of wheat. And the chow sergeant would always say, it's not cream of wheat, it's grits. And I say, I don't want any grits. And they plop it on your plate and said it just comes with it.
Yeah.
It comes with a Southern breakfast. So temptation comes with part of being part of fallen humanity. But we're talking about the extraordinary. We're talking about obsession, oppression, and possession. Extraordinary activity of the devil. And so here's what Father Bamonte says. And he says that these things are the result of one's own culpability because it's interactive. The demon says, oh, I remember you. Remember that thing we did? You and I partied together, right? So here's something that says, superstition and occult practices, such as participation or even being present at sessions with psychics or fortune tellers. Use of amulets and talismans, recourse to mediums, sorcerers, witches, tarot card readers, having attempted any of these on your own. Certain meditation techniques like transcendental meditation, Reiki, opening oneself to chakras or New Age practices. This is what Father Bamonte. Submitting oneself to spiritual cleansing, being present at voodoo, macumba, or other rituals. Membership in secret societies and satanic groups.
Like
Freemasonry and other such groups. In addition, there are what he calls alienating vices, such as alcohol abuse, drugs, sexual perversion, and blasphemy. Such activity, he says, weaken the individual, open him up to the devil's extraordinary activity. So any kind of clairvoyants, channelers, santeros, satanic cults, spirit guides, horoscopes, occult games, all this stuff offers honor to other than the true God. And it goes all the way back to God's self-revelation at Sinai when he revealed himself in this fashion. He was very clear about what false worship does, and he calls it hatred of God. And these bring about open doors to the enemy in your life. That's the big.
Well, what about palm reading? I don't remember hearing that.
Yeah,
it's in there. Palm reading. Yeah. So there's a lot of people, they're like, oh, well, my friend does Reiki, so I let them do it on me. Or I was at a party and like, let's read your palm, or let's do a tarot reading. And I was just kind of going along with the group. But what you're saying is, objectively speaking, you are opening this portal to the demonic, even if you don't even believe in it. Like, I'll do the Ouija board just to be cool or fit in, or you did it.
And it's an open door.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that it's deterministic. It's gonna happen.
Yeah. It doesn't mean if you do these things, you are possessed. That's probably important to say.
But it's important that we confess it as a violation of the first commandment.
Right.
You shall honor no false gods before me.
Yeah.
This is why this is a big one. And again, we have to distinguish between right and privilege or permissions. By right, the baptized soul belongs to God. Right. The soul has been marked with indelible mark of baptism and it is Christic, if you will. Mm-hmm. The sign of the cross, it marks, it's indelible, it's forever by right. But we offer permissions. Yep. So whenever we participate, what he calls these alienating, so you have the primary ones and the alienating vices that exacerbate it. So you can create a vulnerability through alcohol abuse, sexual perversion, blasphemy. Yeah. These are other things that create it. But primarily, these violations are the big one that we see.
Okay. So before we go to sin number 2 on demonic interference, possession, people watching this right now are like, man, when I was 13 years old, I did the Ouija board, or I've been going to Reiki, or, I didn't really realize how serious a palm reading was. Are those people possessed? What do they do? They're watching this right now and they're like, oh man, guilty.
That's the great grace of the Catholic faith, is to go to confession, name it for what it is and confess it. But I think,
what if they're not Catholic?
Become Catholic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Yeah. This is one of the great reasons to become a Catholic. Yeah. Is, like you said, Christ has instituted these 7 sacraments for the entire human experience. And so after our baptism, after our initial conversion, we do fall. And Christ knew that would happen. And so he instituted a means in John chapter 20, whoever's sins you forgive, they are forgiven. He told the apostles, of course, all forgiveness comes through Jesus Christ, because he's the mediator, he's the God-man, the Redeemer. But he has deputized his apostles on earth and the successors of the apostles to reach into every single century since then and bring about this sacramental power. Yeah. And again, just as you can objectively do these things that open up satanic entry and portals, Jesus is instituting in the church these means, but to objectively bring about absolution, forgiveness, restoration.
It's an objective response to an objective opening.
Exactly. And that's one of my favorite things about being a Catholic. Yeah. Is that is there. So
St. Ambrose, in one of his letters of catechetical letters for those being preparation for baptism, he says, when you look at the priest, don't judge him by his outward appearance. Now, Ambrose was in the late 300s. Mm-hmm. He was the spiritual father to Augustine. He's one who evangelized St. Augustine. He says, do not look at his appearance, his specie, which is the outward form. Consider his munus, his office, his office. And he says, and look what he has been given and what he will give you. I want you to see Peter. I want you to see Paul. He said, I even want you to see Elijah, who calls fire down from heaven. And so the munus is, when Jesus goes out on his first day on evangelization in Mark's gospel, he does 3 things. He drives out demons, he preaches, he drives out demons, and he heals. Those are the threefold office of the ordained priesthood. Right. The tria munera, we call it. The munus regendi, to rule over the evil spirits. The munus sanctificandi, to sanctify, to heal. We see this principally through the sacraments. Mm-hmm. All sacraments, in a sense, are sacraments of healing. And then the munus docendi, to teach.
Yes.
So to teach, to preach, to heal, and to drive out demons. And so I can just tell you from sitting in sessions, the demon doesn't even notice the lay people. He'll notice the husband. The husband's there because the husband has authority over the woman. Right. He notices the priest, right, but he doesn't care. You and I are there. Taylor Marshall's a Thomist. He's got his PhD.
Right. He doesn't care.
Wow, I'm really nervous about that. He looks at me, wow, Dan reads the New Testament in Greek. Yeah. That's impressive. Right. We don't hit the radar unless we're dirty. If we have sin on us, that sometimes the demon will notice the individual. But he watches the priest because of the authority. This is Peter. This is Paul. Right. This is Elijah, to call fire down from heaven. Mm. And so when there's an institutional element like that, the institutional response of the church is often required, and that means sacramental response, reconciling through that. And so confessing it. And I've heard non-Catholics say, well, I don't need to confess my sins to a man. I go straight to God. Okay. I don't need to confess my sins to man. I keep going straight to God. Okay. I don't need to, and I always come back with Shakespeare. Methinks the man protests too much.
Yeah.
There's no better feeling of grace, of power, of intimacy to hear the words of the priest. In persona Christi, the person of Christ, I absolve you.
Yeah.
So I wipe them away.
Right.
It's Christ that speaks.
Right.
This goes back to the beginning of our understanding of the priesthood. So we fight an ancient enemy, and the ancient weapons are best.
Right. And I mean, you think about, for people who are like, well, that's not in the Bible. I go for the Bible. Read John chapter 20, verses 19 through 24. It's the day Jesus rose from the dead. He comes to the apostles. He breathes on them. And he says, receive the Holy Spirit. Whosoever sins you forgive, they are forgiven. Whosoever sins you retain, they are retained. And you just have to ask yourself, it's in the Bible, is that true or false?
Yeah.
We agree that Jesus is the Redeemer, but he is deputizing, he is giving authority, he's giving munus in Latin, office, to these apostles to declare and to absolve the forgiveness of sins. That was a gift he gave the church. The Catholic Church believes that gift is still active.
Yeah.
That munus, that office is still active. So I would, if you're watching this, you're not Catholic, I would say become Catholic.
We've had many cases that liberation doesn't take place with this fiery session and what you picture in Hollywood, which was just totally off.
But you have seen someone climb up a wall.
Yeah.
Yes.
All that stuff happens.
Right.
And Father Rupert was asked by someone in Hollywood. They were discussing how Hollywood portrays exorcism, and the person from Hollywood said, the father said, "Why don't you show how it really is?" And he says, "Because it would be too terrifying, too scary for people to see."
Wow.
But it's also holy. It's also holy to see the instrumentality, because technically, when Jesus says, "Whose sins you forgive," he uses the past participle, have already been forgiven.
Yeah.
Perfect past participle. It's the church's instrumentality. And the thing is that the occultists know this. They know what we would call academically, you would call inanimate agency of the divine, or of cosmic power. Okay. Mm-hmm. So how inanimate things can convey power. We know this.
Like when
sacramentals, holy water.
Well, and you remember the Jews, they go into battle and they have the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah.
That's an inanimate object, but it's bringing the power of God to the battle. They knew that, and it was true.
Yeah. Yeah, because it was where the Ark was, that's where victory was.
Exactly.
Right? And who's the Ark of the New Covenant? We'll get into that later.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, where the Ark was, it became instrumental, right? The instrumental causality of the presence of God. And so everything that the enemy does it's a ritualistic interpretation, but it's very liturgical.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Fascinating.
So, yeah, it's very fascinating.
Yeah.
So going back to the very first base commandment, you shall love the Lord thy God alone. Mm-hmm. You should have no false gods. And so the working with people dabbling in witchcraft dabbling is a funny word. Oh, I dabbled in witchcraft. Okay.
Right.
I dabbled. Yeah. It's like I'm kind of pregnant,
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Either did or you didn't.
Yeah.
So this is very key is confessing it, being specific in prayer, confessing it, right, and closing that door.
Yeah.
And then oftentimes, again, this is Catholic theology. You have you have a twofold effect of sin, it says in the Catechism, and we have the spiritual effect, and then the temporal effect, and the temporal punishment due to sin. So oftentimes, when someone has participated in a lifestyle that is contrary to the truth, confessing it is very important, but also doing penance, making satisfaction. Yep. When Jesus went in Mark 9, he comes down the mountain, he gets revealed as the Son to the apostles. They go down the mountain, there's a father whose son is possessed.
Yes.
And it says, how long has this been going on? And the Greek is ad paidiothein. Jerome translates it ab infantia, since his infancy, since he was a little teeny feller, we'd say in Ohio. And so, and then Jesus drives him out. They ask him, why could we not drive him out? And he says, this Janos in Greek, this type can only come out through prayer and fasting. So sometimes there's going to be bodily satisfaction and penance and atonement made for that. So that's kind of the twofold way to undo and take back the privileges and permissions you've given away.
Hope you're enjoying this conversation. To keep watching the next part, click here and learn more.